Story 1. Landlord asks for more rent. I ask him to fix things first, knowing he won't fix them. So, I've been living in this house share on a rolling contract for over 2 years. The house is very run down, but nothing is dangerous, uninhabitable, or depressing. The landlord is really bad at fixing things, and when he does, he turns up unannounced, which is against the law here, and does a very poor job. Last September, the landlord was clearly feeling very motivated as he announced he was going to renovate the kitchen. The old kitchen had cupboards without doors, a very cheap, old oven that used to break all the time, really shabby worktops, etc. My best guess was that it was at least 20 years old. He said the renovations would be done as quickly as possible. He quoted a week to us, but it actually went on for 2 months. And he broke some laws because he disconnected the oven for several days while tenants were living in the house. While the kitchen looks fine now, it was clearly a case of getting in and out and doing the bare minimum as cheaply as possible. He also painted some of the communal areas very badly. He put in 2 new fridge freezers, new to the property but actually secondhand, and they didn't work very well, so he ended up trying to fix them himself. Long story short, I lost all my food in the freezer last December. By the end of it all, I was feeling very annoyed with him. In January 2020, the landlord sent all the tenants an email telling us he had to raise the rent and that we would have to sign new contracts. My rent was only going up by £25 per month, as I have my own en-suite bathroom, which is pretty much falling apart, but he didn't renovate it. I could afford the increase, so I didn't bother to argue it. I emailed him back and said it was fine, but there were a few issues in my room that I would like him to fix, and that I was happy for that to be written into the contract with a time frame for the work to be done, agreed upon by us both, so he could get the higher rent rate straight away. I sent him a list of things, most of them really minor, like wardrobe door handle needs replacing, or there's a crack in the sink. The biggest thing on the list was a problem he's known about for at least 2 years: the shower leaks. I knew full well that he wouldn't get around to doing any of the repairs. He told me that I didn't need to sign the contract or pay the higher rent until he had fixed the things in my room. I said, okay, and have never mentioned any of it to him ever again. The things I asked him to fix aren't exactly impeding my enjoyment of life, so I don't even get annoyed about the fact that they're broken. 10 months later, I'm still paying my original rent rate, and every month I save the amount my rent would have gone up by. It's a really small, pathetic thing to do, but it makes me proud every time my rent is due because I'm pound 250 better off and counting. Just to clarify, I am renting a furnished room, so all the furniture, including the wardrobe, which is built in, belongs to the landlord and is his responsibility. Most of it is incredibly old and shabby. One of my housemates has a chest of drawers with a drawer completely missing, and another one that's falling off the runner. The landlord is 100% responsible for the furniture, as well as the fixtures and fittings in the house, unless it's deliberate damage. If it is deliberate damage, it was done by a previous tenant and, therefore, not my problem. Story 2. The recording studio dilemma. My studio was located in a larger rehearsal and recording studio complex in South London. The studio manager had taken a local band under his wing and had given them free rehearsal and recording time in exchange for the band working in the facility, keeping things tidy, looking after incoming clients, and so on. Essentially, they were treated as assistants in return for free rehearsal and demo studio time. Now, these guys were seriously good, a really decent hard rock outfit, who were all very talented young musicians. They also had zero attitude, which was something of a refreshing outlook in those days. One day, the keyboard player, Chris, came into my studio and told me that the studio manager had decided that it was time for them to put out their first single. To that end, their manager had paid for 3 days in a frontline studio, together with the services of a very well-known producer. In other words, several £1,000s worth of investment. Cool, I thought, and about time. Chris then asked me if I'd be interested in programming all his keyboard parts for the recording. Of course, I jumped at the opportunity. We laid out a plan of action. I had a fair number of synthesizers in my studio that we'd use to supplement his keyboard arrangement. We'd record all the keyboard parts on the computer, around 20 tracks worth, and lay down guide drums, guitars, bass, and vocals on my 8-track tape recorder. By using a timecode track, we could run all these keyboard parts in sync, together with the guide tracks, without having to mix them down to the 8-track. We then spent 4 days working. The first 2 days were spent programming all the keyboard parts and creating the necessary voice patches. The other 2 days, we worked on laying down both the keyboard parts into the computer and recording all the guide tracks. We then did rough mixdowns of both tracks for demo purposes. So far, so good. The next day, the producer arrived at my studio and listened to the mixes. He then stated that he wasn't happy with the song arrangements and demanded that they be restructured, much to the annoyance of Chris, who had written both tracks. I said that rearranging the keyboard parts was fairly trivial, as it was all on the computer, but we'd have to re-record all the guide tracks. Get it done. So, we took another day to rearrange the keyboard parts according to the producer's notes, and another day to re-record all the guide tracks. All the while, I was thinking, well, that's another 2 days on the bill bonus. Again, we produced rough mixes and finally got the grudging approval of the producer. On the day of recording, I carted all the gear we'd used up to the studio. I laid down the timecode track onto the 24-track in the studio and patched in all the synthesizer gear to the mixing desk so that they could drive all the keyboard parts from the computer without having to lay them down or submix them onto the multi-track. For the curious, the drums occupied 12 tracks, the guitar and bass 2 each, and there were 4 vocal tracks, 20 tracks in total. Another 2 were taken up with the rough mix as a guide, leaving 1 track spare. While I was setting everything up, the producer was boasting about how he demanded the hire of a top-notch digital reverb system, which cost a small fortune to rent, let alone purchase outright. It also became obvious that the producer and engineer were old friends and, judging by their behavior, it was clear that they were indulging in a particular type of substance. 3 days later, I got the call that they were all finished and to come and collect my gear. By the time I got there in the evening, the only person on duty was the tape operator. He asked if I was interested in hearing the final mixes. Of course, I was, so after loading all my equipment into the van, I went back into the machine room to hear the results. I was horrified. The guitars were so high in the mix that they were obscuring the vocals, which sounded like strangled chickens. The drums, well, the less said about them, the better. Think of a flatulent warthog in a bath of custard. The bass? What bass? And the keyboard parts that I'd spent so much time on were virtually non-existent. I was incensed and expressed my frustration to the tape operator, while reminding him that I wasn't blaming him personally. I then took all the equipment back to my studio and went to the pub for the calming influence of a large single malt. The next day, I was in my studio sorting out some stuff when the phone rang. It was the producer, furious about the comments I had made to the tape operator. Holding the phone away from my ear, he was rather loud. I let him rant on until he ran out of steam. I then suggested that he bring his tape down to the studio and compare it to my mix in front of the band and their manager, and let them decide on the relative merits of the 2 mixes. He agreed, and the next day, he showed up full of bluster and bravado. We adjourned to the main studio and played back both tapes to the assembled group. Afterward, the silence was palpable. The band expressed their opinion that my rough mixes were far better. The manager, however, said that he thought the producer's version was superior. Glancing at him, I could clearly see he was in a bit of a dilemma. He'd just spent the better part of £4,000 on the recording session, and thus felt justified in his opinion. Even though it was apparent his real feelings went the other way, he wasn't about to lose face in front of the producer. I left them to their own devices, thinking, frankly, I don't care what you do, as long as you pay my invoice. The next day, Chris popped into my studio and said that their manager was going with the producer's mix despite the band's strong objections and was sending that tape to the pressing plant. Fine, I said. Then Chris adopted a conspiratorial tone. We think your mixes are exactly what our sound should be. Can you give me the master tape? Sure, but why? He then said that he had been tasked with sending the tape to the pressing plant and, with the approval of the rest of the band, he was going to substitute my rough mixes for the producer's version. Oh, how delightful! Okay, but it's your responsibility, you're accountable for the fallout. He readily agreed. Fast forward a couple of weeks. 1,000 copies of the press single had been delivered to the studio. I turned up and went into the main office to collect my mail. Sitting there was the producer, who, as soon as he saw me, adopted a smug expression. He then proceeded to play the single on the office's stereo system and began to boast about his talents as a producer, while expressing the opinion that I had a lot to learn. I politely listened while he ranted on, and once the record finished, I said, "I'm sorry, my friend, but what you just heard was actually my mix. Perhaps if you spent less time indulging in certain substances, you might have noticed." Then, I discreetly withdrew to my studio to the sound of the producer howling like a banshee on a rampage. I learned later that the band had managed to sell virtually all of the singles at their subsequent gigs. Not bad for a rough mix. Story 2. Every Tuesday and Thursday after work, I visit my mom's shop, where she's the manager, to get some food after a long day. I know all the staff and am friends with everyone there. Sometimes, I'll even help stack shelves if my mom and her coworker are falling behind. Now, let's talk about what happened today, just a couple of hours ago. I was in the store talking with my mom and helping her stack shelves since a delivery of frozen food had just arrived. I had some time to kill, and it was fairly quiet, with no one in the store except us and her employee. My mom had put aside the food I usually buy: a chicken wrap, a packet of chicken balls, and a Mountain Dew, so she went to the back to get it. That's when Karen walked in. She moved at a snail's pace, slow and menacing, as she browsed the freezers. "Excuse me, where's all your frozen section?" she demanded. It just arrived. "The delivery was not even 10 minutes ago. Sorry it's not put out yet," I explained. "Why?" she snapped. "The store hasn't had a chance yet," I replied. "Well, I need chicken, a full chicken. Go get me one," she insisted. "I can't do that. I don't actually work." She cut me off. "Go get me a chicken." "I don't work here," I repeated. "Then why are you stacking shelves?" she questioned. "Well, it's my moo," I started to explain, but she interrupted again. "I don't want to hear excuses. Go get me a chicken." "I just said I don't work here. Now, let me finish telling you I'm stacking shelves to help my mom out for 5 minutes while she's in the back," I clarified. "Well, why would you do that if you don't work here, you little liar?" she accused. "Just for reference, I'm 6'1", about 2 whole feet taller than her, and I'm 24 years old. Like I said, I'm just helping out for 5, I tried to continue, but she interrupted for the 3rd time. "Where's the manager?" "You girl," she pointed to my mom's employee behind the checkout counter. "Go get the manager. I want him fired." That's when the manager, my own mother, came out with my food in hand. Karen pushed me out of the way and marched up to her. "Hey, what do you think you're doing, pushing past him like that?" my mom exclaimed. "I want him fired," Karen yelled. "Again, you daft person. I don't work here," I reminded her, trying to hold back from cursing. "You want him, my son, who doesn't actually work here, fired, right after you just pushed him into the freezer," my mom questioned. "He should have moved." "Now fire him," Karen demanded. "I've got a better idea. You're banned. Now, kindly, if you know what that means, leave my store and don't ever come back," my mom replied firmly. "But I need a chicken," Karen insisted. I whispered to her, "Not from here, you don't." She then screamed in my face, "You little jerk, this is your fault." "Miss, if you don't leave, I know for a fact my employee has called the police already," my mom warned, even though she hadn't. "And, well, you're on camera, which has been recording you and your voice this entire time." Karen put her head down, whispered, "I'm sorry," and walked out of the store. I got my food, and my mom told me she's never seen her before and is glad she never will again. And to top it off, my mom didn't even make me pay for my food, so today turned out to be a good day. I got to see my mom deal with a Karen, and I got free food. Story 3. So, I took my mom to get some groceries and other items at Mr. Walton's department store. This just happened yesterday, on a Saturday. Since it was really nice outside, I wore an old, faded black t-shirt with denim coveralls that I had cut the legs off of for summer. My mom is in her 80s and uses a rollator walker, so I pushed the cart while she walked beside me. I try to pick up the food items last so the cold stuff stays cold, but Mom insisted on starting on that side. I relented, and off we went. After we got the groceries in the cart, Mom wanted to head over to the electronics section because I had been telling her that my husband and I were debating whether to buy all the Avengers movies or get a streaming service. Mom wanted to see the cost of the DVDs. This is where we encountered Karen and her child. I was explaining the difference between DVD and Blu-ray to Mom when Karen approached and told me she needed my help next. Mom was sitting on her walker while we were talking. I politely told her, "I don't work here, I'm just a customer." Then I pointed out an employee in a blue vest. Karen wasn't having it. No, you are obviously helping this old lady buy a DVD player. I'm just telling you I am next. Sorry, but I really don't work here. I'm shopping with my mom, I repeated. Listen here, Missy. I know you work here, so as soon as you're done with the old lady, I am next, Karen insisted. One thing I forgot to mention, I have blue hair right now and had it up in 2 ponytails. While I don't look like a kid, I definitely don't look 50 either. I hate being called Missy, especially when the person saying it is younger than me. If any of you have read my other shopping trip stories, you know my mom is a very feisty Italian woman. Mom wasn't having it either. Listen, lady, open your ears. My daughter doesn't work here. Look at how she's dressed, she snapped. Karen persisted. Ma'am, please, I'm just asking this girl to serve me next. Her child chimed in. Mom, she really doesn't work here. Look at her clothes and hair. Karen wasn't convinced. Just be quiet. You wanted a gaming console, and we're gonna get you one. If this girl doesn't show more respect, I'll make sure we get a discount. By this point, my mom was done with her nonsense. In Italian, she started cussing out the woman. My mom doesn't like being the center of attention, but if you annoy her, you better duck and run. Sales staff finally arrived since Mom was getting louder the longer they took. Karen saw the employees and immediately started complaining about how rude I was, how horrible of an employee I was, and how I needed to be disciplined for my attitude towards her. The employee looked at me, my mom, and Karen before politely asking Mom, in Italian, what had happened. Mom calmly explained, referring to Karen with an Italian insult. I was trying hard not to laugh. Karen had her say, and then it was my turn. I turned to Karen and said, Look, I don't know who your parents are, but, dear, I could be your mother. Teaching your child to act like this is unacceptable, especially right now with the pandemic and businesses struggling. I'm pretty sure you knew all along that I don't work here and were hoping to cause enough of a scene to get the acting manager to give you a massive discount. Well, I'm here to tell you that's not happening today, not here, not in this store. You think that just because I'm dressed in old, frayed clothes, you can pull a stunt like this? Then tell the staff that I accosted you and caused all this drama. Guess again, child. On top of your bad behavior towards me, you've upset my mother. I am so tempted right now to call the police and have you charged with harassment and elder abuse. Karen finally left, and Mom and I finished our shopping and headed out. In the car, Mom turned to me and said, I guess you're a little stressed today, huh? Oh my goodness, that was the understatement of the year.